Right now we are in spooky season, so we are doing some ghost stories along with the history, and today is going to be the haunted Myrtles Plantation. Now, we are not only going to talk about the history, but we're going to talk about some of the controversy. You know how that goes. I like to get things stirred up, and I've got my opinions on this one as well. Imagine that. You're back! Well, hello, my silky friends. It's Sunday. You know what time that is. It's story time here at Silky Southern Tea. If you are new to this channel, I do crime, vintage mysteries, Southern culture, basically all the weird stuff. Let's start with today's tea. It is raspberry black tea. And I've got my tea ball. I thought I'd show it this time. This is a clean one, though. I didn't just use this one. Let's pour a cup, and let's start. Today's hat. To cover up this funky hair. All right. Today, we are going all the way back to Louisiana in the 1800s. Now, we were just there 2 weeks ago when we visited with Delphine Lalaurie. Yeah, this is a much better story. Okay, the Myrtles Plantation has like 200 years of history, so I am going to hit the highlights for things that I am going to bring back up later in the video. So let's start in 1794 when Dave Bradford, an attorney from Pennsylvania, is kind of on the run. Oh, Whiskey Dave got all wrapped up in the Whiskey Rebellion, which was about taxation, trying to pay off the debts of the American Revolution, so they decided to tax the whiskey. Well, that just made everybody mad. Don't be taxing the whiskey. But they did, so there was a big brouhaha, and people were just looting and burning buildings and all kind of such. Well, Whiskey Dave, as he was referred to, was part of that rebellion. In 1785, Whiskey Dave had married Elizabeth Porter, and they had started a family up north. As fate would have it, during this, rebellion, he kind of had to hightail it out of town. So he came down to just out of St. Francisville, Louisiana, where he got a land grant from the Spanish for 600 acres. That's a lot of acres. Well, he decided he was going to build a plantation on it. And here we go again. He finds a beautiful place for a house, and he starts digging. Lo and behold, he's digging up bodies right and left, and they're of the Indians. Well, you know what they did back in those days? They just didn't care. In this case, Whiskey Dave, it said that he dug up the bodies, and he just put them in a pile and burned them. Well, first of all, there's going to be trouble from that, okay? What have we learned all this time? Do not build on an Indian burial ground. But he did it anyway. So some people say the land was cursed from the very beginning. Well, he started building in 1796, but his family was still up north because he wanted them to be safe as he was under house arrest. But by 1799, he had made a lot of progress, and what do you think? He got a pardon from the U.S. government. Now he was free to bring them back to the location that he called Laurel Grove. So there they are for a few years. They're living the good life in Louisiana. But old Whiskey Dave didn't live too much longer. He passes away. And during this time, being an attorney, he had taken like a few people under his wing to teach. One of those people was Clark Woodruff. Well, now, he was studying a little bit more than just the law. He started studying Whiskey Dave's daughter, Sarah, and as romance bloomed under the crepe myrtle trees at Laurel Grove, they fell in love. So, shortly thereafter, they got married, and Mr. Bradford's wife, Elizabeth, was left to run the plantation. Well, she needed Mr. Woodruff's help, so it all worked out good. Just keep it in the family. But now, here is where the first reports of a haunting start during the years that Clark Woodruff and Sarah lived in the house, and we'll visit that in just a minute. Now, they had gotten married in 1817. By 1823, they had 4 children. They were busy. Unfortunately, in 1823, Miss Sarah succumbed to yellow fever. We'll revisit that, too. Followed shortly in the next few months by 3 more of her children. So there was only one daughter left, Mary Octavia. She did live to be an adult and grow up and get married. But now there was some more tragedy in store for Laurel Grove. In 1830, there was a big market crash, and it caused a lot of financial problems that Mr. Woodruff really couldn't keep up with. So he took a job as a judge in another district, and he sold the place just a few years later to Ruff and Sterling. So in 1834, Ruff and Sterling bought it lock, stock, and barrel, the slaves, the furniture, everything. Well, now, Mr. Sterling was from a very wealthy family. He had several other plantations, and he just didn't like the name of Laurel Grove. He didn't think it suited his status. So he and his wife decided to change the name to the Myrtles Plantation, because there were a lot of crepe myrtle trees growing all around the house. I don't know why myrtles are more prestigious than laurels. Go figure. Well, what the Sterlings also did is they decided to revamp and renovate this house. They decided to add more rooms. They just moved everything around, built this grand old porch. It took a long time to do all the renovations. But strangely, 4 years after the total completion of what it was now called the Myrtles, Mr. Sterling passed away. People just dropping like flies around here. Now, he and his wife had had 9 kids, only 4 of which survived to adulthood to be able to marry. Now, this wasn't really so odd because there were things like yellow fever, tuberculosis. Remember now, there wasn't any antibiotics, so if you got sick, they just kind of sat around your bed and waited to see if you were going to die. I mean, if a woman didn't die in childbirth, she likely died from something else. It was a very rough time. Now, when Mr. Sterling died, we were right on the edge of the Civil War. And during the Civil War, the Myrtles got looted, it got ravaged. Now, it did keep standing, so that was great. A lot of houses did not survive. It just took a raw end of the deal. Now, Mr. Sterling's wife was well able to run that plantation. There was some very strong women back then, and she kept it going throughout this time. But in 1865, she was growing older, and she turned it over to a Mr. William Winter, who her daughter, Sarah, had married. Well, by 1867, he was just bankrupt. Now, I don't really know if it was mishandling of the fortune, because what the Myrtles also suffered during this time is a currency change. Now, you remember during the Civil War, most of the South had Confederate dollars. Well, when the North won, that money was useless. People were just broke. So I think that was probably a very large contributor of the problems. So the house went back to the bank, but in 1868, Sarah bought it back. And I don't really know how that worked. But anyway, they got the Myrtles back. Well, Mr. Sterling didn't get to enjoy that very long, because one night in 1871, it said that he was having a meeting at his house. Some say it was a Sunday school meeting. I don't know. But what we do know is a stranger came up on a horse and knocked at the door and said he had some private business with Mr. Sterling. So Mr. Sterling left his party, went out on the porch where that guy just shot him point blank. And there he died, right on the porch of the Myrtles Plantation. Now, this is the only murder that has been documented fully. But we're going to talk about that, because you know that's what we do. So his wife, Sarah, was heartbroken, never remarried, and she did handle the plantation for many years. And then we are going to skip way, way ahead, because it changed hands so many times. I mean, it seemed like people weren't there all that long. So let's skip ahead to the 1950s, when a wealthy woman named Marjorie Munson bought the Myrtles Plantation. And she began to hear all of these stories from the local people, handed down from the local, African American population. And this is where we come into the legend of Chloe. There are several things about the Myrtles that are said to be legend and not really true. And what is wrong? Okay, y'all know I have the craziest things that go on in this room when I try to film. I kept looking at the light, it wasn't even coming in that bright. But whatever, let's go on. The legend of Chloe starts with Clark Woodruff. That was Whiskey Dave's son-in-law. It was rumored that Judge Woodruff took a very peculiar interest in one of the slaves named Chloe. As a matter of fact, it was more than just a passing fancy, and they started a full-blown affair. Well, now, Chloe was a house slave, which meant in the levels of slaves, she had it much better. I wouldn't say good, but better than the others. And it was pretty typical of slaves back in this time to listen in on conversations with the owners. They kind of wanted to know what was going on, give everybody a heads up. One day, Chloe was caught listening with her ear against the bedroom door. And Judge Woodruff, he got so angry, he hacked her left ear right off, just to teach her a lesson. So after that, Chloe began wearing a green turban to cover her, disfigurement. And she was also sent to the kitchen to work. If you don't know, a plantation kitchen was usually an outbuilding beside the house, but they had them separate because it was so hot. And I can imagine in the Alabama sun, it was hotter than ever. And Chloe hated working in the kitchen. So she wanted to get back in the good graces of the judge and his wife. And I will say this, also when you work for someone and you're in the house and you're with them every day, you do kind of develop a relationship and a bond with the kids and the wife, whatever. So she missed that life. So her plan was to bake a cake. She was going to add an extra ingredient that would make them sick to their stomachs, just so she could nurse them back to health and prove to the judge what an asset she was and that she needed to be back in the house. So when she was down in the kitchen mixing the cake, she added in a little oleander. But not being a chemist, she didn't know how much. She put a little bit too much oleander in, and although the judge decided not to have any cake that night, his wife and two of his kids did. They got terribly sick, were taken upstairs, and Chloe was trying to nurse them back to health, knowing what she had done. But unfortunately, all three of them passed away. Well, when the other servants caught wind of this, they were so angry and scared because they knew if it was traced back to a slave, they were all going to feel the pain. So it is said that other slaves grabbed Chloe, dragged her out of the house, and strung her up on one of the trees, lynched her by the swamp. And then when she was dead, they threw her body into the swamp with the alligators. On one hand, to disprove this legend, it is said by records that Sarah died of yellow fever, as did her children. And so there was no way that was true. I even read one account where somebody was saying, oh, and Judge Woodruff's character has been maligned all these years. He never did have an affair with Chloe. Well, let me tell you something, buddy. They all did. That was the culture back then. You can call your great-great-granddaddy all the good things that you want, but it happened on the plantations. It was very, very common, and they even had children with their slaves. I mean, this was well known. We talked about the quadroons 2 weeks ago, so don't give me that nonsense. He was no saint. Now, whether he actually had this affair with Chloe and this whole story is 100% true, probably there are details that are different. But I'm kind of on my high horse today. But it's true. That was just kind of like a right, the master's right, with the slaves. It is a hideous thing. But it happened. So deal, okay? Let's go back to the public records, okay? Because when we were studying Delphine Lalaurie, we learned that Louisiana had very, very strict slave laws, okay? You could not mistreat a slave. Well, here is the judge whacking off a servant's ear, and then there's tales of her being lynched. I'd say that's a little bit of harsh treatment. So, on one hand, would they have admitted to that? Lynching was illegal. I mean, it happened. And, nobody was ever prosecuted. But it was still not a legal thing, and you couldn't do this to your slaves. So, was yellow fever going around? Did Sarah get it? Possibly the story is true, but that they didn't die and Chloe got caught? I don't know. But what I'm saying is, this had been around with families for so long that I think there has to be some truth to it. So you've got that story. Now you also have stories of William Winter, who was killed on the front porch. The legend says that he made it off the porch and he went into the house up to the 17th step of the staircase going up, where he succumbed. And his wife held him in her dying arms. Now this comes into play with the hauntings, but they say this is not true at all. That he actually died on the porch, which, being shot at point blank range, it don't look good. So anyway, like I said, the reported hauntings started around the time of Chloe, passed down through the years, but then brought it more into the public light in the 1950s by Marjorie Munson. Now, in 1992, I believe the house was owned by the Moss family. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tita Moss is the one who was trying to take some pictures for insurance purposes. Now, they had built a general store that was right next to the house. So to get insurance on it, or insurance quotes, whatever, they had asked for pictures of different angles of the house and the adjoining property. So she takes the pictures and she sends them in, and then she gets a letter back saying, "Oh, we can't accept these pictures because we told you there cannot be any people in the pictures, property only." This is the picture that they sent back. Now, if that doesn't resemble a woman in a turban, I don't know what does. But for years, people had already said they'd seen a woman with a green turban, or sometimes they called it a bonnet, whatever. There was always this older woman around. So there had been sightings for years. Miss Moss decided she knew she had taken this picture. She decided she was going to send it in to be analyzed by National Geographic. Now, they took their time over, weeks, whatever. They tested it. They looked at that picture and they said, that picture is 100% authentic. And you will see that on their website. Now, also, a couple of more hauntings that we're going to go into is that a lot of people see a gentleman come in the door and go up to the 17th step and then just kind of evaporate. So they're thinking that was William Winter. Also, a lot of people trip, like they get to the 17th step, up or down, and all of a sudden, like they feel something under their feet and they trip. And they say it's the dead body of William Winter. I don't know if it's him, but everybody can't be clumsy on the 17th step, can they? One of the biggest hauntings of the Myrtles is the mirror. My goodness, this mirror, no matter how much they clean it, it has handprints that just show up. And sometimes it looks like there's blood dripping down the mirror. Now, before you say it's an old mirror, which it has been redone, resilvered, and they've tried to fix this mirror. But every time they do, the handprints come back, and some people even see faces in that mirror of little girls, and sometimes of Miss Sarah. Now, whether the legend of Chloe is true or not, What we do know is every single person, when I was researching, said, oh, this story isn't true, but the house is haunted, without a doubt. You can get on the internet and you can find the darndest pictures. Here's one. Check this out. Did you see the little girl's face? That's creepy. Here's another one of a soldier. The Myrtles now is a bed and breakfast, and there are a lot of people on YouTube and on the internet who have written and documented things that have happened while they were there, objects moving and stuff. As a matter of fact, when Hollywood came to town a few years ago, they were remaking the movie The Long Hot Summer, and they ended up staying partially at the Myrtles, and they were going to do a little bit of filming in a room there. So one morning they move all of the furniture and they get the room set up. Meanwhile, they go and they leave because they're shooting something else. When they come back, all the furniture has moved back to where it was to start with, and there was nobody in the house. During this time, the cast and crew also observed objects moving, falling off, and stuff around the room. They didn't stay for very long, and they're like, we're out. So, is the Myrtles haunted? Apparently, yes. It gets absolutely great reviews for a bed and breakfast, so I would love to go one day and see it myself just because I'd like to see it. I don't care if it's haunted or not. It's a beautiful old house with a very rich history. Tell me what you think about the legend of Chloe. Do you think, like I do, that there is some basis in truth, not just because of the hauntings, but probably a little bit of cover-up, right? I mean, how weird would it be if somebody tried to rewrite history? That doesn't happen, does it? Alright, I hope you enjoyed this story of the Myrtles. Next month, we are doing true crime with crazy twists. It's going to be Not Guilty November, and I hope that you stay with me for that one because it is going to be a wild ride. In the meantime, y'all, stay silky.